The dumpster was already half full when I pulled into my father's driveway on a Saturday morning in October. And the first thing I saw, sitting on top of a pile of black contractor bags, was my mother's wedding dress. The lace was yellowed. The bodice had been folded the wrong way. Somebody had thrown a roll of duct tape on top of it. I sat in my car for 90 seconds before I got out. I did not slam the door. I did not run. I walked up to the dumpster with my hands shaking, and I lifted the dress out, and I held it against my chest, and I looked up at the second-floor window of the house I grew up in, and I saw my stepmother's silhouette, and she saw me, and she did not move. 24 hours later, my father filed for divorce. He had been waiting, he told me later, for exactly this. He had been waiting for the day when she would do something I could not unsee, so that I could not unsee what he had been seeing for 2 years. Welcome back to Broken Stories. If this is your first time here, we tell stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet moments that change everything. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and let's get into it. My mother's name was Eleanor Halstead. She died when I was 26, pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the last day. She was 61. She had taught 5th grade music for 34 years at Hartwick Elementary, and at her funeral, the line of former students went out the door of the church and around the block. I had been her only child. My father had been her only husband. We had been a small, quiet, 3-person family for 26 years. And then we had been a small, quiet 2-person family for 19 months. And then my father had married Janelle. I am Frances. I am 32 now. I work as a museum registrar at a regional history museum about 40 minutes from my hometown. My job on most days is to catalog and preserve objects that belong to people who are no longer alive. I document them, I store them, I make sure they are not lost. I had thought before that Saturday morning that this was a profession I had chosen because I loved history. I have come to believe in the years since that I had chosen it because of my mother. I had been preparing somewhere inside myself to be the keeper of her things long before I knew I would need to be. My father is Walter Halstead. He is 68. He is a retired civil engineer. He worked for the State Department of Transportation for 36 years. He drives a Chevy pickup truck that is older than I am. He drinks 1 cup of coffee in the morning and 1 glass of red wine with dinner. He does not raise his voice. He does not waste words. He had loved my mother quietly and completely for 31 years. And when she died, he had become a man I did not fully recognize. I want to tell you about that because it matters. The grief did not make him loud. It made him still. He sat on the back porch every evening for the first 6 months after her death. He drank his wine. He watched the bird feeder. He came in at 9 o'clock. He went to bed. He woke up at 5:30. He had coffee. He went to the back porch again. He did not call me as often as he had before. He did not return my calls quickly. I drove out to the house every Sunday. I made him dinner. I sat with him. He thanked me. He did not talk about my mother. I did not push. I had thought, he is grieving. This is what grief looks like for some men. I had not understood then that what I was watching was not grief. It was the slow disappearance of a man into a house that was no longer his. He met Janelle Crocker 18 months after my mother died. He met her at the bank. She was a teller. She was 49 years old, divorced, with a daughter in her late 20s she rarely spoke about. She had short auburn hair and the kind of voice that filled a room before she did. My father had gone to the bank to deposit a check, and Janelle had asked him how his day was going, and he had said fine, and she had said, "Mr. Halstead, you look lonely. You look like a man who has not been asked how his day is going for a long time." He had laughed. He had not laughed in 18 months. He had given her his number. He told me about her at Sunday dinner 3 weeks later. He told me her name. He told me she was kind to him. He told me they had been having coffee twice a week. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since my mother had been alive, an expression of cautious hope. He said, "Frances, I know it's fast. I know it's strange. I just want you to know I am seeing someone." I want to be very clear. I had been glad. I had been actively, openly glad. I had hugged him. I had told him I wanted to meet her. He had been moved by my reaction. He had said, "Frances, you are your mother's daughter." I have thought about that sentence many times since. He had meant it as the highest compliment he could give me. He had also, I think, meant something else by it. He had meant that I was the kind of person who would let in someone who came to him kindly. He had meant that he trusted me to give her a chance. I gave her a chance. I want to record that clearly. I gave Janelle Crocker every possible chance for 2 years. And I am putting that on the record because what I am about to tell you is the story of a woman who did not deserve a single one of them. And I want you to know that I am not telling it from a place of preformed dislike. I am telling it from the place of someone who was wrong about a person, who tried hard not to be wrong, and who was wrong anyway. They married 8 months after they met. The wedding was small. A judge at the courthouse, 5 guests. I was one of them. Janelle wore a cream-colored dress. She did not wear a wedding ring at the ceremony. She put one on later that day at the lunch we had at a steakhouse, and she made a small speech about how she had not expected to find love again at her age. She cried. My father held her hand. I clapped politely. Janelle moved into my parents' house, the house I grew up in, the following month. The house was a 1958 Cape Cod on a half-acre lot, with a kitchen my mother had remodeled in 2002 and a den my father had built additions onto over 20 years. My mother had lived in that house for 31 years. Her hand had touched every wall. Her music room was on the 2nd floor, the room with the upright piano she had taught children on, the room with the framed sheet music and the photographs of her with her favorite students. The attic was full of her things, her wedding dress, her teaching files, her sheet music collections, boxes of photographs from before I was born, the quilt her grandmother had made for her, which she had kept folded in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed for as long as I could remember. I had not removed any of her things from the house in the 19 months between her death and my father's marriage. I had asked him, gently, about a year in, whether he wanted me to help him sort through anything. He had said no. He had said, "Frances, I am not ready to touch any of it." "I am sorry to leave you with this," I had said. "Dad, there is no rush. Take your time." He had nodded. He had thanked me. The first time I noticed something missing was 4 months after Janelle moved in. I went out to the house for Sunday dinner. I walked past the dining room. The framed photograph of my mother that had hung above the sideboard for 20 years was gone. In its place was a small abstract print I did not recognize. I asked Janelle about it, lightly, over dinner. I said, "Janelle, what happened to Mom's photo above the sideboard?" Janelle smiled. She said, "Oh, Frances, I moved it. I thought it was a bit much, having her right above the dining room table. Made it feel like she was watching us eat. I put it in the den. I'll show you after dinner." She did show me. The photograph was on a wall in the den in a slightly smaller frame, hung at a height that was lower than I had expected. It was not in a place of honor. It was in a place of polite tolerance. I want to say something here. I am a museum registrar. I know what placement means. I know that the height at which an object is hung and the wall on which it hangs communicates something about how the institution feels about that object. Janelle had not lost the photograph. She had moved it from above the dining table, where it had reigned for 2 decades, to a corner of a side room where it would still technically be present, but where no one would naturally look at it. This is an established practice in museums. It is called demoting an object. It is what curators do when they want something out of the central narrative without throwing it away. I did not say any of this to Janelle. I said, "Oh, yeah, I see. Thanks for showing me." That was the first thing. It was not the last thing. Over the next 18 months, my mother's presence in the house began to disappear. Not all at once, slowly. The framed sheet music in the music room came down and went into the closet. Janelle said it was too cluttered. My mother's piano was moved from the music room to the basement. Janelle said the music room was being converted into a craft space, and the piano needed to be somewhere it wouldn't be in the way. My mother's quilts were folded and put into the linen closet, replaced on the beds with new comforters Janelle had chosen. My mother's grandmother's china was packed into boxes and labeled garage storage. Janelle said she was just trying to make the house feel current. Each time I noticed, I asked. Each time I asked, Janelle smiled and explained. Each explanation sounded reasonable. Each explanation, taken alone, was reasonable. It was only when I started keeping track, 6 months in, that I understood what was happening. I started a list. I want you to understand this. I am 32 years old. I am a museum registrar. When I see objects disappearing in a pattern, I document. I started a small notebook. I kept it in the glove compartment of my car. After every Sunday dinner, I would sit in the driveway for 5 minutes and write down what was missing or had been moved that week. The notebook was 3/4 full by the time of the dumpster. I want to pause for a second. If you have ever been the child of a deceased parent and watched somebody slowly remove that parent from a house, drop a comment. I am asking because I think this experience is more common than people talk about, and I think it has a specific kind of grief that does not have a name. My father did not seem to notice, or that is what I had thought, for almost 2 years. I want to be careful here because what I am about to tell you about my father is something he and I did not discuss until after the divorce was filed, and it is a thing that requires care to describe. My father had been seeing what was happening. He had been seeing all of it. He had been writing his own list in a small notebook he kept in the drawer of his nightstand since approximately 3 months after Janelle moved in. He had not stopped her. I had judged him for that before I understood, and I want to put my judgment on the record so that I can also put my retraction on the record. I had thought in my worst private moments that my father was weak, that he was letting her erase my mother, that his grief had made him passive in a way that allowed Janelle to walk into our family and dismantle it, object by object. I had not said this to him. I had said it to my husband Marcus more than once, in the kitchen of our small apartment after Sunday dinners that had left me feeling sick. I had been wrong. I want to put that on the record too. My father had been documenting because he had been planning. He had been planning because he had figured something out about Janelle that I had not yet figured out, and he had been waiting, patiently and quietly, for her to do the one thing that would make me see what he had seen. He had been waiting for her to cross a line so visible that I would not be able to talk myself out of it. The dumpster was the line. It was a Saturday in October. I had not been to the house in 3 weeks because Marcus and I had been dealing with a small health scare with our dog, who turned out to be fine. Janelle had texted me Friday night. The text had said, "Frances, honey, your father and I are going to start tackling the attic this weekend. We've been meaning to for ages. Come by Saturday morning if you want to help." I had texted back, "I'll be there at 10. Please don't throw anything of Mom's away without me." She had texted, "Of course not, sweetie." I had pulled into the driveway at 10:17. The dumpster had been in the driveway, which I had noticed first because dumpsters in driveways are not subtle. The dumpster had been one of those small ones, about the size of a chest freezer, the kind you rent for a residential cleanout. It had been positioned with its open end facing the front door. There had been a small folding ramp set up between the dumpster and the porch. The dumpster had been more than half full at 10:17 in the morning, which meant that Janelle had not been planning to start at 10. She had been planning to start hours earlier, before I arrived, and to be most of the way through it by the time I got there. I want to be clear about what was on the top of the dumpster, because I want you to understand exactly what I saw in the first 3 seconds. My mother's wedding dress, in a clear plastic dry cleaning bag, folded the wrong way with a roll of duct tape on top. My mother's quilts, 3 of them, the one her grandmother had made, and 2 she had quilted herself. My mother's high school yearbook, a box open at the top of my mother's sheet music, the framed photograph from the dining room, glass cracked, in a black contractor bag with the bag pulled down so I could see the frame poking out. My mother's teaching certificates, 3 of them, in their original frames, also broken. The cedar chest from the foot of my parents' bed had been emptied. The chest itself was on the lawn, lid open, empty. 46 years of my mother's life were on top of and inside that dumpster. I sat in my car for 90 seconds. I did not move. My hands were on the steering wheel. My phone was on the passenger seat. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "Frances, are you here?" I said, "Dad, where are you?" He said, "I'm in the basement. I'm waiting for you. Janelle is upstairs. Frances, look in the dumpster. Look at all of it. Take pictures. Do not go inside the house yet. Do not go inside until you have called me back. Take pictures of everything." I said, "Dad, did you know?" He said, "Frances, I have known for a long time. I will explain. Take the pictures." I got out of the car. I walked to the dumpster. I stood there. My hands were shaking. I lifted my mother's wedding dress out of the dumpster. I held it. The lace was yellowed. The bodice had been folded the wrong way. I have explained this already. What I have not explained is what it felt like to hold it. It felt like holding a body. It felt like holding the ghost of a body. My mother had been buried in a different dress. This dress had been the one she wore in 1990 at the church on Marlin Street in the photograph that had hung in our hallway for 30 years. I had played with this dress as a child. My mother had let me wear it once when I was 8. I had stood in front of her bedroom mirror with the train pulled around my feet, and she had taken a photograph, and the photograph had also been on the wall in the hallway. Both photographs had been taken down by Janelle 6 months earlier and put away, she had said, for safekeeping. I lifted the dress out. I set it on the dry pavement of the driveway away from the dumpster. I went back. I lifted out the quilts. I lifted out the yearbook. I lifted out the box of sheet music. I lifted out the framed photograph and the certificates. I set everything on the driveway in a neat row. I took photographs, many photographs. Photographs of the dumpster, photographs of each item, photographs of the cedar chest on the lawn, photographs of the duct tape on the wedding dress, photographs of the cracked glass on the photograph frame. I documented. That is what I do. That is what I had been training myself to do for 9 years. While I was documenting, Janelle came out of the house. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and rubber gloves. She saw me. She saw the items on the driveway. She saw the wedding dress in my arms. She did not move for a moment. Then she said, "Frances, I can explain." I said, "Janelle, stop." She said, "Frances, I was going to call you. Some of these things were in such bad shape. The dress had moths. The quilts were—" I said, "Janelle, stop. I am asking you to go back inside the house. I am not going to speak with you right now. I am going to finish doing what I am doing. My father is in the basement. I am going to talk to him. You and I will speak later with him present. Right now, I need you to go inside." She looked at me. She did not move for a long second. Then she turned and went back into the house. The screen door closed behind her. I heard her go up the stairs. I called my father. He came up from the basement. He came out the back door so he would not have to pass Janelle, and he walked around to the driveway. He saw the items on the pavement. He looked at them for a long time. He did not cry. He did not speak. He walked over to the wedding dress, and he picked it up, and he held it the way I had held it. He put it back down carefully on the driveway. He said, "Frances, I need you to come with me to the basement." I said, "Dad." He said, "Frances, there is a folder. I have been keeping it for 2 years. I want you to see it. And then I am going to tell you what I am going to do tomorrow. And then we are going to load all of this into your car, and you are going to take it to your house, and I am going to handle the rest." I followed him into the basement. He had a small workbench in the corner. There was a metal filing cabinet next to the workbench. He opened the second drawer. He pulled out a manila folder. The folder was thick. He set it on the workbench. He opened it. The folder contained his list. It also contained, I learned, a great deal more. His list was a small notebook in the same format as mine, but thicker, with 2 years of entries in his careful engineer's handwriting. Every object Janelle had moved or removed, every date, every justification she had given. The folder also contained financial records. Janelle had been moving money. He had documented this. She had been transferring small amounts, $400 here, $600 there, from their joint checking account to a separate account in her name at a different bank. The transfers had been small enough to not trigger automatic alerts. They had totaled over the previous 20 months a little over $34,000. The folder contained credit card statements. Janelle had opened a credit card in my father's name without his knowledge 12 months earlier. She had been making purchases on it. She had been paying the minimum balance from the joint account. The balance was now $11,200. The folder contained correspondence with a real estate agent. Janelle had been quietly inquiring 8 months earlier about putting the house on the market. She had spoken with 2 agents. She had not, as far as my father could tell, told either of them that the house was not in her name. I stopped reading at this point. I looked up at my father. I said, "Dad, the house is in your name, right? The house is still in your name." He said, "Francis, the house is in my name. It has always been in my name. Your mother and I bought this house in 1989. The title is in my name. Your mother was on the deed. When she died, the deed reverted fully to me through right of survivorship. I never added Janelle. She has asked. I have always said that I was waiting until we had been married for 5 years. I had a reason for that. The reason was not that I was being old-fashioned. The reason was that I wanted to know who she was." I said, "Dad, you knew." He said, "Francis, I knew within 4 months. I did not know for certain, but I suspected. The first thing I noticed was that she moved your mother's photograph from above the sideboard. The second thing I noticed was that she stopped wearing her wedding ring at home. The third thing I noticed was that she had asked me twice in the first 3 months about my will. I hired a private investigator that month. He has been working for me for 20 months. He has documented her off and on over the last 2 years. He has not found another man, in case you are wondering. There is no affair. What there is a pattern. She has been married twice before. Both husbands left her or died, and in both cases, she ended up with houses and money she had not started with. The investigator interviewed her first ex-husband. The ex-husband told the investigator that during their marriage, she had systematically removed every photograph and object that belonged to his late mother from his house. He had been a widower when they married. He divorced her after 4 years. He told the investigator he had felt during the marriage like he was being slowly erased. I sat down on the workbench stool. I said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Francis, I am going to tell you the truth, and I am going to ask you to listen all the way through. I did not tell you because I needed you to see it for yourself. If I had told you 6 months in that I thought my new wife was a methodical predator, you would have wanted me to leave her. You would have been furious with me for staying. You would have had to take a side, and the side you took would have been your father's because you are loyal. And you would have spent 2 years angry on my behalf. I did not want that for you. I also did not want to act on a suspicion I could not prove. I am a civil engineer, Francis. I do not act on suspicion. I act on documented evidence. I needed time. I needed her to do enough that I had a complete record. I needed her to do something so visible that you would not need to be told. I needed your mother's wedding dress to end up on top of a dumpster. I am sorry. I have known for a year that this was where it was going to end. I have been waiting for her to choose her moment. She chose this Saturday. I have an attorney. I have had an attorney for 14 months. The petition has been drafted. It will be filed Monday morning at 9 a.m. I have the paperwork in the safe in this basement. I want to pause. If you have ever had a parent reveal to you that they have been quietly building a case for 2 years while you thought they were drowning, drop a comment. I am asking because there is a specific kind of awe that comes with realizing your father is not the man you thought he was, but is instead a more careful and patient man than you had given him credit for. I said, Dad, the money, the credit card, what about that? He said, Francis, the money she has moved is, in this state, marital property, which means that technically she is moving money that she has a partial right to. The credit card she opened in my name, however, is not. That is identity theft. My attorney has told me that we will not pursue criminal charges if she signs the divorce settlement we are offering. That is leverage. I said, Dad, what does the settlement say? He said, she gets her car, she gets her clothes, she gets her personal effects, of which there are not many, because she has spent 2 years quietly liquidating things that were already mine. She gets a one-time payment of $20,000 to find a new place to live. She does not get the house. She does not get any portion of my retirement. She does not get any portion of your mother's estate. She agrees to a non-disparagement clause and a non-contact provision. In return, I do not pursue charges for the credit card. I do not pursue civil action for the items she has thrown away today. I do not contact the families of her previous husbands, both of whom my investigator has located and both of whom would, I believe, be willing to provide statements. The settlement is generous. It is generous because I would rather pay her to leave than have to fight her in court. My attorney agrees. I said, Dad, will she sign? He said, Francis, she will sign, because the alternative is the credit card, which is a felony. She knows this. She does not know yet that I know. She will know on Monday at 9 a.m. when she is served at her job. He paused. He said, Francis, tomorrow morning, I am going to wake up at 5:30 like I always do. I am going to make my coffee. I am going to go out to the back porch. I am going to sit there until 9 a.m. when the petition is filed. At 10 a.m., I am going to drive into town and buy your mother's wedding dress new dry cleaning. I am going to drive to your house and give it to you, along with all the other things on this driveway. I am going to come back here. I am going to sit on the porch for the rest of the day. Janelle will probably come home from work that evening, having been served, and she will probably yell. I will let her yell. I will not engage. By Tuesday, she will be staying with her sister. By the end of the month, she will be out. Francis, I am sorry it took 2 years. I needed you to see her clearly. I could not undo this for you with a phone call 18 months ago. You needed the dumpster. I said, Dad. He said, Francis, I loved your mother for 31 years. Every single object on that driveway was something I had been protecting. The reason I let her move them around the house, the reason I let her put the photograph in the den, The reason I let her pack the china into the garage, all of it, was so she would feel safe. So she would feel like she was winning. So she would, eventually, do something so unmistakable that I could end this without any doubt in your mind. I was not weak, Francis. I was waiting. Do you understand the difference? I did. I had not until that moment. I understood now. I said, Dad, I am sorry. I judged you for 2 years. He said, Francis, you judged me silently, and you kept showing up for Sunday dinners anyway. I knew what you were thinking. I let you think it. It was the only way. We loaded the items from the driveway into my car. We did it carefully. The wedding dress went in the back seat, draped flat. The quilts went in the trunk. The cedar chest fit in the truck bed of my father's pickup, which he drove to my house behind me. We unloaded everything in my garage. Marcus came home from work in the middle of it. He stood in the garage doorway. He looked at me. He looked at my father. He understood without being told. He picked up 2 boxes and started carrying them inside. I drove back out to the house with my father. I went inside. Janelle was on the couch. She had been crying. She stood up when she saw us. She said, Francis, your father and I were going to... My father said, Janelle, stop. Francis and I have spoken. I have nothing further to say to you tonight. You have my permission to stay in this house tonight. Tomorrow morning, I would prefer you go to your sister's. On Monday, you will be served with divorce papers at your place of work. I have an attorney. The settlement we are offering is generous. I would advise you to accept it. We will not be discussing this any further tonight. Janelle looked at him. She said, Walter, what are you talking about? My father said, Janelle, I have known for 2 years. I have a folder. The folder is comprehensive. I do not want to have this conversation in front of Francis. I do not want to have it tonight. I am going to bed. Francis is leaving. We will speak through attorneys. He turned and walked up the stairs. I did not follow him. I left the house. I drove home. Janelle was served Monday morning at 9 a.m. at her job at the bank. She left her position that afternoon. She drove to her sister's house in a town about an hour away. She did not return to my father's house. The settlement was negotiated over the next 6 weeks. She signed. She had no leverage. The credit card was the lever. She knew it. Her attorney, a tired-looking man named Pruitt, knew it. They signed. The divorce was finalized in February, 4 months after the dumpster. Janelle has not contacted me since the day she stood up from the couch. I do not expect her to. The non-contact provision technically permits her to send a holiday card to my father, which she has not done. She has not contacted my father either, as far as I know. She moved out of state at some point during the spring. I do not know where. I do not need to know. My father's investigator did one last piece of work for him. He wrote up a summary of the 2 years of investigation. The summary was 38 pages. My father gave me a copy. He said, Francis, I want you to have this in case anyone in the future ever asks you what your father was doing during those 2 years. I want you to have the answer. I am not embarrassed. I am proud of how I handled it. I want you to know I was proud. I read the summary. I keep it in a folder in my home office next to my own notebook from those 2 years. They sit together, the 2 notebooks, his and mine. I want to talk now about the things in the garage. They sat in the garage for 2 months. I could not bring myself to look at them. Marcus did not push me. He understood. One Saturday in December, he came into the garage and he said, "Frances, do you want help?" I said yes. We spent 8 hours that Saturday. We laid every object on the garage floor. We documented each one. We photographed each one. We made a master inventory. The wedding dress was sent to a textile conservator, an older woman named Beata Witzkowski, who had been recommended by a colleague at the museum. Beata took the dress for restoration. She kept it for 4 months. She returned it to me in May, restored, professionally cleaned, and refolded. She charged me a fraction of what the work was worth. She said, "Mrs. Halstead, I lost my mother 12 years ago. I will not charge you full price for this kind of work. Pay it forward." The quilts were laundered carefully and stored in archival boxes. The sheet music was scanned and the originals were placed in acid-free folders. The framed photographs were reframed and reglassed. Their certificates were reframed. The cedar chest was refinished by a furniture restorer my father knew. It now sits at the foot of the guest bed in my house, and inside it are the quilts and the wedding dress and a small leather notebook. The notebook is mine. It is the original one from those 2 years. I keep it in the cedar chest because it belongs there. I have not put my mother's photograph on the wall in my own house. Not yet. I am still deciding where it should go. I want to choose carefully. I want to give it the position of honor it had in my parents' dining room for 20 years. I am taking my time. I am waiting until I find the right wall. The photograph sits, for now, on the small shelf in my home office. I look at it every morning. My father is well. He is 68. He still drinks 1 cup of coffee in the morning and 1 glass of red wine with dinner. He still drives the Chevy pickup. He still goes to bed at 9 o'clock. He sees me every Sunday. We have dinner at my house now, mostly. He does not host very often anymore. He says the house is large and quiet, and he is fine with it being quiet, but he prefers to be in mine for meals. Marcus is fine with this. Marcus likes my father. My father likes Marcus. My father has not dated since the divorce. I asked him once, gently, about a year after Janelle left, whether he was open to meeting someone again. He said, "Frances, I am 68 years old. I had 31 years with your mother. I had 2 years with a woman who tried to use me. I am done. I have my house. I have my truck. I have you. I have your husband. I have my back porch. I have the bird feeder. I do not need anything else." I said, "Dad, are you sure?" He said, "Frances, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." I want to end with this. There is a particular kind of patience that does not look like patience. It looks like inaction. It looks like a man on a back porch drinking wine while a woman quietly disassembles the house around him. It looks from the outside like passivity. It looks sometimes like weakness. It was not weakness. It was a man who had loved my mother for 31 years and who, when faced with a stranger trying to erase her, had chosen the longest and most certain path to defending her memory. He had not engaged. He had documented. He had let the woman feel safe so that she would do enough to make her own case for him. He had waited for the dumpster because he had known somehow that there would be a dumpster and that the dumpster would be the thing his daughter could not unsee. He was right. The dumpster was the day. The Monday after was the morning. The 4 months after that were the negotiation. And then it was over. My mother's things came home with me. The cedar chest is at the foot of my guest bed. The wedding dress is restored. The quilts are stored. The photograph is on a shelf, waiting for the right wall. My mother is not gone. My mother is here. My father saved her. He took 2 years to do it. He did it carefully. He did it without me knowing. He did it because he loved her, and he loved me, and he was not going to let either of us be erased. I am 32 years old. I am a museum registrar. I document objects. I preserve them. I make sure they are not lost. I have been training for this work my whole life, and I did not know it until the morning I lifted my mother's wedding dress out of a dumpster on a Saturday in October. I know it now. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me whether you have ever watched somebody quietly remove a parent from a house. Tell me what you saved. Tell me what you wish you had saved. I read them. If you know someone who needs this story, a daughter, a son, anyone who is watching a house slowly empty of a person who is no longer there to defend their things, share this video with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening. The wedding dress is in the cedar chest. The cedar chest is at the foot of the guest bed. My father is on his back porch. The bird feeder is full. And my mother is here. I mean that.